Okay, here we go. Thanks and welcome to RailsConf. As everybody on this stage said, it's awesome to be back on a stage. It feels like in the last 2 years, maybe we don't know what happened or not a lot has been going on, but actually we've seen through the keynotes already that a lot has been going on in Rails. And most importantly, we had a new major release of Rails last December. Rails 7 is out. You might have seen blog posts like this one, which is from the official Rails blog, or tutorials, videos. And I noticed that many of these focus on the changes to active record and rail ties, which are important. But actually, there have been many other changes. And this is kind of like why I wanted to give this talk, because there might be new features that you're not aware of. And even if you leave this talk with just like one cool thing is that it's in Rails 7 and it's going to invite you to update, I think that's going to be great. Also, I'm not going to talk about everything that is new in Rails 7 because it's been 12 months of work, more than 4,000 commits by 500 people. But definitely, I cannot do this without the contributors. And these are just the top 60 people who contributed to this version of Rails. So if you see any of these names on anybody's tag around here, and many of them are, just go and thank them from all of us to contribute to this awesome framework. So the structure of this talk, I'm just going to go kind of like library by library to give you some overview of what has changed. And I will start with just like talking about Ruby, then active support, active model, active storage, action view, active record, and rail ties. And for each change, there is a number, which is the PR or the commit, and then you can go and explore a little more. And so I'm going to get started. OK, so not only Rails has evolved, but Ruby itself has evolved. There is a new release every Christmas. So if you want to use Rails 7, you need at least Ruby 2.7, recommended Ruby 3. This shouldn't be a big deal. They're backward compatible. They've been out for a couple of years. But it's great because they're more performant, so it benefits your application. Also, there are new methods in Ruby. For instance, there is a new method called filter_map that was added to Ruby 2.7. And so somebody already went into the Rails code base and made a PR to replace what it used to be map.compact with this new performant method. So Aileen just talked before about how to contribute to Rails. This is an example of something that maybe you can all do. Still coming from the Ruby, there is a new debugger. By default, for the last years, the default debugger in Rails was called bybug. And now we're saying bye to bybug. And welcome to another one, which is just called debug. And the syntax is pretty much the same as every other debugger. But this is also more compatible with Zeitwerk, which is what Xavier talked about in the keynote. OK, active support. This is the library of Rails that extends Ruby. Like it defines some new methods on Ruby classes. For instance, in Rails, you can type 2.years.ago. That is not Ruby. That is active support. And so one Ruby standard class is enumerable, which is the ancestor of set, hash, arrays, and so on. And there is a new method on enumerable. It's called sol. What it does, it gives you back the first item of a collection as long as there is only one. So the sol item of an array with the string x is x. But if you try to invoke it on an empty set or on a hash with more than one item, you're going to get an exception. And the nice thing is that this method is also included in active record query method. So you can write something like this. Give me the sole user where the admin flag is true. Maybe that's a requirement of your application. There must be one, otherwise there is an exception. Other methods added to enumerable are maximum, and there's also a minimum. So if you have an array of objects with a certain feature, like in this case, I made an array of these users, and they all have a name and an age. Now you want to ask, what's the maximum age? You can just do that, and it's going to give you that number back. Okay, active model. This is the library of Rails that helps you with models, so attributes, errors, validations. One of the validations that already exists is validate numericality to check if an attribute is a number. But an addition in Rails 7 is that now you can pass a range. So you can say, is this attribute like, is the age of an adult a number? And is it within 18 to 99? If it's not, then that instance is invalid. There is also a new validator, which is very powerful. It's called comparison validator. And I'll explain it with this example. So let's say you have a form where you ask your users what's their birth date. You want to make sure that their birth date is less than or equal than today. Otherwise, they would be born in the future, and they would be time travelers, and I don't know, there would be a paradox. So you can do that. Or you can ask them for their preferred name. They might leave it blank if they want, so allow nil true, but otherwise it should be other than their given name. So this is pretty powerful. You couldn't do something exactly like this before. I'm kind of skipping through this library, like just giving you some overviews because the main changes are at the end. But if you're interested in everything that it has changed, every single library has a change log file, so you can just go and see literally everything that has changed. But now let's talk about active storage. This is the library of Rails that helps you with files, attachments, uploads, downloads. And a nice feature of active storage is that it has analyzers. So if your users upload an image, then active storage can tell you the dimension, the resolution, if it's black or white, out of the box. And it can do the same for videos. So the news in Rails 7 is that it also does this with audio files. If you ask your users to upload audio files, then active storage can give you the duration, the bit rate, and so on. Something else that is really cool about active storage is that it integrates with cloud services like Amazon S3, Google, Microsoft. And all these services have a feature called expiring URLs. So you want to point to an image on S3, but you don't want that link to be shared forever, just maybe for 15 minutes. And now it's really easy to write that code in active storage because all the active storage methods like Rails blob path in this case, they accept a new argument, expires in, and that's going to tell you your cloud service to give you back a URL that expires after 5 minutes. Also, if you just want to change this globally, like you don't want to go in your code and change every single image tag, you can set this in your configuration with active storage, URLs expire in 60 minutes, and that's going to apply to your entire code base. And now Action View. This is the library that helps you with ERB files, rendering, HTML, and so on. Action View has a lot of helpers. Probably the most used one is link to, which you can use to display an HTML link in your website. There are changes to link to and to a couple of other methods that I put here. So first of all, not only there is a method called link to generate an HTML link, but maybe you didn't know there's also a method called phone to that displays a link, and when you click on it, it makes a phone call. And there is also a method called SMS2. When you click on it, it sends an SMS to that number. Before Rails 7, all these methods needed at least 2 arguments, what you're displaying on the page and the action, like the number that you're going to call and so on. So the change in Rails 7 is that now the second argument is not always required. What that means is if you just say phone to and the phone number, Rails is just going to use that phone number to display it on the page and also to call that. Or it's the same with SMS too. It's just going to show the number. And in the case of link to, if you have a conventional resource, let's say you have a profile, like a table of profiles, and every profile has a name, and that's what calling toS returns, then Rails is going to be smart enough to just use the profile name as the link caption, and then when you click on it, it's going to go to that profile page. By the way, how many people have used Rails 7 here? Just so I understand. That's a good 30%. So I hope everybody else will update soon. Cool, so we're halfway through our journey. I also want to mention that there are changes to active job, action text, and so on. I just had to summarize them a little bit here. So let's talk about the cool stuff, the popular stuff, active record. This PR is amazing. This is a great PR. Add encryption to active record. So let's take a step back. When you use active record, you have models like person here. They're normally stored in a database table, and all the attributes are stored as column, and normally they are in plain text. So the name of your user is in plain text. We don't store passwords in plain text. Luckily, we already have solution for that, like bcrypt. But if you think about it, it's not just passwords that we should not store in plain text. Because imagine you have a table with all your users and all their emails and physical addresses and whatever information. Maybe you want to encrypt that as well, because if your database is stolen, corrupted, shared, then that's really bad. So you want a way to encrypt other attributes. And this is what Rails 7 gives you. It gives you a method where you can specify which attributes to encrypt. And the reason why I say this PR is awesome, it's because it's kind of like an iceberg, meaning for you, Rails developers, it's really easy. You just need to call this method. But under the hood, everything else still works the same. Like you could still do person.findByEmail and pass an encrypted or unencrypted email, and it's still going to work. So everything else underneath is still working. So this is pretty amazing. So if you want to look at the good and kind of big PR, this 41659 is really great. Here's another addition to active record, another method called load async. So let me explain this code. This is just like an index page where we want to display some categories and some posts. So we're going to make a request to the database to give us all the categories. And then we're going to wait. Maybe that call to the database takes 5 seconds. Then we're going to ask for some posts. Maybe that's going to take another 5 seconds. And then we're going to render the page. This is not great because your web response is going to be 10 seconds. The users are just going to leave. But maybe you don't need these calls to be blocking. You can just say, hey, can you load the categories, but meanwhile, can you continue and do the rest? Load the post, and then start rendering the page, and then only when you need to display them, then maybe wait for them, or maybe they're available by then. And now you can do all of this appending load async to your active record relation. So all those queries will be run in the background, and then they will not be blocking. And so this might be great if you have especially queries or scopes that are slow, but that you don't need right away. So you can give this a try. Once again, this API is really simple, but the work that it's doing is amazing under the hood. Still in active record, there is a new method called excluding. It also has an alias, which is without, so you can also do post without. And you can use this when you want to load, like in this case, give me all the posts of a blog, except post 1 and post 2, because maybe they are already in the page you are in. And this generates the SQL that's exactly the query that you want. In the past, you probably would have done the same by loading everything from the database and then doing like a reject. or something like that, and now you don't have to do that. This is just exactly what you want. And finally, still in active record, I think this is pretty neat. This is a new method called invert where. So let me explain this. Imagine you have a concept of active users. So you have this scope where active users have accepted your terms and conditions and are not locked. And user active are the ones that can access your website. But then you have a single page where you want the opposite. You want the inactive users, because maybe that's where admins go to unlock them. So what do? Well, you could write a new scope inactive where you manually flip all those booleans, but in Rails 7, you don't have to do that, because if you append invert where to your scope, it does it for you. So it saves you some coding. Once again, if you just joined, you can also find all the slides on speakerdeck.com/ClaudioB. All the links are there. All the PRs are referenced. OK, so finally, let's talk about Railties, which is the library of Rails that puts it all together. It has the templates, the generators, and for instance, one thing that it does is generate the gem file of your Rails application. When you create a new Rails 7 app, there are two gems that will not be there anymore. One is Spring, and one is Listen. So these were two gems that had been added in previous years to improve performance for your development. So Spring would keep your application in memory, so it would save you some time when you were developing. And Listen was doing an evented file watcher, once again, to help you in terms of just like developing faster. But in recent years, computers have become faster, and with modern SSDs, we don't really see much of a benefit for this compared to the headaches that sometimes they could give, especially Spring. So now they're not enabled by default, but if you want them, you can just uncomment them, and they're going to be there. And this finally got to the PR that made the news. It was mostly talked about in the blog post that I mentioned before. And it's funny because the PR itself is easy. It just replaces one gem with another, but under the hood, it changes a lot. So let me give you some context for this one. You guys are probably all backend developers. You write Rails, but either you or somebody in your team writes front end. And we're not in 2005 anymore. You probably don't have a single .js file with all your code. You like to write your front end in multiple files, in TypeScript, with React, or any way you want it, right? And the thing is, browsers don't understand that. Like, browsers don't understand TypeScript. So you need a piece in the middle that bundles or transpiles however you write front-end code into something that the browser understands. So when Rails 6 came out, the idea was, well, there is already something out there that does this. It's called Webpack. So let's just use Webpack. Let's not reinvent the wheels. And so Webpack was integrated in Rails with a gem called Webpacker. Now, some years have passed, and you know that the JavaScript world evolves very rapidly, and Webpack is not the only solution anymore. There are other solutions that do similar things. There is one called ESBuild, and there is one called Rollup. So what Rails 7 is doing is saying, let's give the freedom to developers to choose whether they want to use Webpack or something else. So what this JS bundling Rails gem is doing is actually giving you the freedom to do that. In Rails 7, now when you create a new app, you can pass this option, --JavaScript, and you can select what you want. If you still want Webpack, that's one option. But if you want something like Rollup or ESBuild, you can pick those two. So it's opening up. It's kind of the concept of Rails as omakase. You can pick and choose what you want. And also this gem put some convention around it. So for instance, it doesn't matter what you use, the assets are always going to be built in the same folder. And to run the server locally, you can just type yarn build -- watch, or there is also a new command, bin/dev. So even if you use rollup or webpack, it's still going to work. So it's just a convention for that. And it's going to look for your changes. And then as you change your TypeScript, it's going to bundle it again, and so on. So I think this is really great, also in terms of like direction. It's opening up to new possibilities. And something parallel to this, very similar, happens in CSS. So CSS kind of went through a similar evolution. Until Rails 6, you could use natively, you could use CSS or Sass in your applications. But once again, Sass is not anymore the only CSS framework. Maybe use Tailwind, maybe use Bulma, Bootstrap, things like that. So Rails 7 also replaces the specific Sass Rails gem with a new one called CS Bundling Rails and so on. And these give you the option. It's kind of like the other one. You can now specify, hey, I want to generate a new Rails app and use Bulma as an example, right? And then you don't have Sass, okay? And you don't have the dependencies of Sass. If you still want to use Sass, that's an option. And even this gem has some conventions, so you can just run it, and it's going to watch your files and recompile them. And some of these options, like Tailwind, for instance, doesn't even require Node.js under the hood, so that can also be a benefit. Okay, and to conclude, I have one PR that I want to talk about. So a second ago, I said that you guys probably write front-end however you want, maybe in multiple files, and these files have to be bundled and sent to the browser. If you were here yesterday for Aaron's closing keynote, he already mentioned that browsers have also evolved, and they have a new feature called import maps. Chrome has it, Edge has it, and the other browsers have shims to make it work. With import maps, browsers now accept multiple JavaScript. They don't need to be bundled all in once, as long as they have logical names that references their files. So this is amazing because imagine you write your front-end code, and then that is sent to the browser. It saves you time. You don't need Webpack. You don't need anything in the middle. Of course, if it is like a typo, the typo is going to be sent. There's no build at all, right? So what Rails 7 is saying, can we try to make this the default? Can we encourage Rails users to program in a world where they write JavaScript like that with no bundler? And this is all summarized in this PR, which has replaced Webpacker with imported Hotwire as default JavaScript setup. So what this means is there is a specific JavaScript framework called Hotwire, which is the combination of Stimulus and Turbo, that is actually written supporting import maps with ES modules. So you can have a scenario where you write JavaScript in this way, and there's no bundling step. So you don't need yarn. There's no bundle. You don't need Node.js. And so Rails 7 is making this the default. So if you do Rails new app with no options, it's going to use import map, Turbo, Stimulus, and Node.js is not required. There's no bundling step at all. However, not everybody is happy with this choice. You might want a different choice. And the main case here is if you use React. React today doesn't work exactly with import maps because you have things like JSX. You have things that have to be compiled, okay? So if you want to use, for instance, React, you can still do it. You're going to say, no, I actually want Webpack. You specify that option, and you can just do -- skip Hotwire. So you don't use Stimulus and Turbo at all. It's as easy as passing those options. Or maybe you have your own way to manage JavaScript, and you just want to tell Rails, forget about it, I'll deal with it, okay? And so you just do -- skip JavaScript, and that's also an option. So in summary, the story of this PR is that if you don't specify anything, you're going to have your application set up with Stimulus and Turbo and import maps, and let's say you even use Tailwind, you can have an environment with no Yarn, with no JS on development and production. But if you want these things, they're there for you. So to conclude, I had many more slides. And these are just like the top slides that didn't go into my talk for brevity. The first one was the entire topic of the opening keynote. So you can go and look at that. The other ones are all pretty cool. Actually, since I have a few minutes, one that I really like is this create database via UI. I'm just going to explain in a second. You know how when you forgot to run a migration, then you run your Rails application, there is that red screen that said, you need to run the migration, but there is a button that lets you run it from the browser. So now, if you forgot to create the table, like from scratch, you also have that. You have a button that says, hey, you didn't even create the table, and then you can just click on the button, it's going to do that. And yeah, these are other ones. Just go check them out. So this concludes my talk, and I really hope you guys update to Rails 7 if you haven't done it yet, and then follow Eileen's advice to become contributors, because it's pretty awesome, and we need all of you. So thanks, and have a great rest of your day.